A quiet stretch of Highway 97A in McDavid, Florida, became the center of a disturbing investigation, one that began with a digital report, crossed county lines, and eventually led investigators to a 49-year-old man facing more than 20 felony charges involving child sexual abuse material. What investigators uncovered, according to newly obtained court records, began months before the arrest. The first warning came in September 2025. The Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office received a CyberTipline report from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, commonly known as NCMEC. The report originated from Yahoo, which had flagged an email account after multiple files containing illicit material were allegedly uploaded through the account. At first, it was a digital trail, an email address, a phone number. And somewhere behind those pieces of information, a person investigators had not yet identified. Detectives began tracing the account's activity, examining login records, and attempting to determine where the digital activity was coming from. Then they found a critical lead, an IP address connected to a residence in the 10,000 block of Highway 97A in McDavid. The investigation had suddenly moved from a screen to a physical location. But there was another complication. The reported activity was connected to Escambia County, even though the initial investigation had begun in neighboring Santa Rosa County. Eventually, in May 2026, the case was formally transferred to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. That transfer would bring the investigation into a much deeper phase. According to the arrest affidavit, an FDLE special agent obtained and examined digital evidence associated with the suspect. And what investigators say they found on a seized smartphone was far more extensive than a single suspicious file. The forensic examination allegedly uncovered approximately 55 files depicting the sexual abuse and exploitation of children. The victims, according to the affidavit, included both boys and girls, ranging in age from as young as 1 year old to teenagers. Investigators also reported finding 2 computer-generated or manipulated files. At this point, the case was no longer simply about an online account or an isolated digital exchange. According to the court documents, investigators say they had evidence connecting the material directly to McDuffie's devices and online activity. The affidavit also describes email correspondence that investigators say was linked to the suspect account. According to the report, those communications involved discussions about the material with other users. That detail added another layer to the investigation. Investigators were not simply trying to determine what had been downloaded or received. They were also examining how the material had moved through online communications, who had been involved, and what the suspect allegedly knew about the files he possessed. Then came the interview. According to the arrest affidavit, McDuffie acknowledged viewing and receiving illicit files through email and through links connected to an overseas image platform. But investigators say McDuffie offered an explanation for how he came into possession of the material. According to the report, he claimed that other people had sent him the images after he posted online about his own past personal trauma. At the same time, the affidavit says McDuffie denied ever harming or molesting any children. That distinction is important. The charges described in the warrant concern the alleged possession and distribution-related activity surrounding child sexual abuse material. The documents do not establish that McDuffie personally abused any child. But investigators say the digital evidence was enough to support a lengthy list of felony charges. The arrest warrant charges McDuffie with 22nd-degree felony counts of possession of child sexual abuse material. He also faces 2 third-degree felony counts involving possession of computer-generated child sexual abuse material. And there is another third-degree felony charge, using a two-way communication device to facilitate a felony. Altogether, that is 23 felony counts. And behind every file described in the affidavit is something much more serious than a number on a charging document: the alleged exploitation of real children. For investigators, the case appears to have been built piece by piece. It began with a CyberTipline report. Then came the Yahoo account. Then the phone number associated with that account. Then the login records. Then an IP address leading investigators to a residence on Highway 97A. Then the county transfer. Then the forensic examination of a smartphone. And finally, investigators say, an interview in which McDuffie acknowledged receiving and viewing illicit material while denying that he had ever personally abused a child. That progression illustrates how investigations involving online child exploitation can unfold. A single report can trigger a chain of digital evidence that investigators may follow across platforms, devices, jurisdictions, and eventually into the physical world. In this case, that trail allegedly led to McDavid. And now, the investigation has reached the court system. McDuffie, 49, was booked into the Escambia County Jail after the FDLE arrest warrant was issued. His bond was set at $230,000. But an arrest warrant is not a conviction. The allegations contained in the affidavit are claims made in support of criminal charges, and McDuffie remains entitled to the presumption of innocence unless and until he is proven guilty in court. What makes this case particularly disturbing, however, is the scale of the evidence described by investigators. Approximately 55 files were reportedly recovered during the forensic examination. The alleged victims range from infancy to the teenage years. Investigators also reported computer-generated or manipulated material and communications they say were connected to the distribution or discussion of the files. And all of it emerged from an investigation that started with a report generated thousands of miles away from the courtroom where the consequences may ultimately be decided. The internet can make criminal activity appear distant. A username can hide behind a screen. An email address can conceal a person's identity. A file can exist as nothing more than a string of digital data. But investigators followed those digital traces until they allegedly connected them to a real residence, a real device, and eventually a real suspect. That is where this story now stands. A CyberTipline report in September 2025 sparked the initial investigation. A digital trail led investigators toward McDavid. The case was transferred to FDLE in May 2026. A forensic examination allegedly uncovered dozens of files involving the sexual exploitation of children. And after months of investigation, James Thomas McDuffie was arrested on 23 felony charges. The case now moves beyond the investigation and into the legal process, where prosecutors will have to prove the allegations in court. For the investigators who followed the trail, the work began with a notification buried inside a digital system. But what that notification eventually revealed was a case involving allegations of some of the most serious crimes imaginable. And as the court proceedings continue, the evidence gathered from emails, login records, digital devices, and forensic examinations will become central to answering the question at the heart of the case. What exactly happened behind that screen, and what responsibility did the person on the other side of it have for the material investigators say they found? For now, those questions remain for the courts to determine. What is known is that a report triggered an investigation. The investigation uncovered extensive digital evidence, and that evidence ultimately led authorities to a McDavid man now facing more than 24 felony allegations connected to child sexual abuse material. The investigation may have started online, but its consequences are now very real.